It was a morning like any other until it wasn't. The air in Ouagadougou hung heavy with the scent of dust and distant tension. President Ibrahim Traoré sat alone in his office, hunched over defense reports and handwritten notes. Outside, soldiers trained in the courtyard, their movements sharp, disciplined. Inside, the silence was broken only by the rhythmic ticking of a clock and the soft scratch of his pen. Then came a knock, not rushed, not hesitant, deliberate. His chief aide stepped in, unusually pale. In his hands, he held a thick envelope, sealed in crimson wax. The insignia on the front was unmistakable double-headed eagle, golden leaves, and bold Cyrillic script. "From Moscow, Mr. President," the aide whispered. Traoré's eyes narrowed. He took the letter but didn't open it. For a moment, he just stared at it, feeling the weight not just physical, but political. He had never received direct correspondence from the Kremlin. Not a call, not a cable, nothing. Until now, he broke the seal. Slowly, inside was a formal invitation, signed personally by President Vladimir Putin. The content was shocking. Russia was preparing for its annual Victory Day parade May 9th, a powerful display of military might at Red Square, commemorating the end of World War II. Putin extended a personal invitation to Traoré to attend, as a guest of honor. But it wasn't just a ceremonial gesture. The letter praised Traoré's fight against neocolonialism, his defiance against foreign interference, and his vision for a self-determined Africa. It called him a beacon of sovereign leadership in a world gripped by manipulation. And then came the line that made him pause. "We believe your presence will not only honor the legacy of global resistance, but signal to the world that a new axis of independence is rising." Traoré leaned back in his chair, letter still in hand. He had fought rebels. He had faced betrayal. He had stood alone in front of empires. But this was something different. An invitation wrapped in diplomacy, but pulsing with danger. Was this a genuine hand of solidarity or the beginning of something far more calculated? He looked out the window at the soldiers below. The world was watching, and he had to choose. Traoré read the letter again, slower this time. It wasn't just a formal invitation, it was a message packed with intent. Putin's words were carefully chosen. He spoke of a world shifting, of alliances being reborn. He referred to Burkina Faso as a frontier of resistance and praised Traoré's unwavering stand against Western hegemony. The letter subtly referenced France's waning influence, NATO's double standards, and the economic stranglehold used to punish defiant nations. Then came the true weight of the message. Russia was not only inviting him to observe the Victory Day parade, they were offering to host him as a symbolist signal to the world that Africa had voices, willing to stand beside Eastern powers, challenging the post-colonial world order. In a single page, the Kremlin had extended more than a chair in the front row. It was a place in history. Putin even hinted at future cooperation, economic aid, military training, and technology sharing. But no promises, just possibilities, and yet, the tone was unmistakable. "Stand with us, and we will stand with you." For Traoré, the ink on the page felt like it was written with fire. He set the letter down and exhaled deeply. This was no ordinary invitatio. For hours, Traoré said nothing. He sat with the letter beside him, eyes locked on the ceiling fan spinning slowly overhead, as if time itself had slowed to match his thoughts. Accepting Putin's invitation meant far more than attending a military parade. It was a declaration, a pivot that could redefine Burkina Faso's place in the global arena. But every decision came with a cost. He imagined the headlines, "Traoré aligns with Russia." He pictured the reactions from Washington and Paris: sanctions, diplomatic pressure, the unspoken threats that often followed leaders who dared to step outside the Western script. Burkina Faso had already felt the sting of isolation. Could they afford more? Yet, wasn't that the very reason Putin had reached out? Because Traoré was already on the path of resistance? He recalled the faces of his people, young soldiers who believed in sovereignty, elders who longed for dignity, farmers who wanted peace without conditions. Could a single visit to Moscow strengthen their fight for autonomy? Or would it open the floodgates of retaliation? His fingers tapped against the edge of the desk. There were no easy choices anymore, only consequences. and the world was waiting to see which he would choose. The Presidential Council was called that same evening. The room was dim, quiet, but tense like the air before a coming storm. Around the long oak table sat Traoré's closest advisors, generals, ministers, revolutionaries turned politicians, men and women who had followed him through fire. He laid the letter in the center. No one spoke at first. Then General Kabore broke the silence. "It's bold, historic. The Russians are reaching out because they see us as equals. That means something." Foreign Minister Diallo disagreed. "This isn't just a handshake, it's a spotlight. And in that spotlight, we'll be marked by the West, by France, by those waiting for a reason to cut us off." Others chimed in, some supportive, others cautious. Economic cooperation with Moscow could be a lifeline. But at what price? Will we trade one influence for another? One advisor, older, leaned forward. "Mr. President, the question is not whether this is safe. The question is, do we still want to walk alone in the dark? Or with those who will at least admit the darkness exists?" Ibrahim Traoré listened. Every word, every warning, and deep inside, he understood this was no longer about a parade. It was about choosing a side in a world already dividing. On the morning of May 8th, a presidential jet bearing the insignia of Burkina Faso touched down in Moscow. The world took notice. Ibrahim Traoré, dressed in a tailored black overcoat and his signature green beret, stepped onto Russian soil under heavy snowfall. Cameras flashed. Analysts speculated. Western diplomats whispered. But Traoré's expression remained unreadable. The next day, he stood shoulder to shoulder with global powerhouses President Vladimir Putin, President Xi Jinping, and other leaders defiant of Western dictates. As tanks rumbled past and fighter jets thundered overhead, Traoré's presence sent a message louder than any speech. Burkina Faso would no longer be a pawn, it was stepping onto the board as a player. Russian media hailed him as a lion from the cell. African outlets celebrated his courage. But not all applause was genuine. In Washington and Paris, talks of destabilization began to swirl. Behind closed doors, Traoré met privately with Putin. What they discussed was unknown. But upon his return to Ouagadougou, he carried more than just diplomatic gifts. He carried a new sense of defiance. The path ahead was uncertain, but one thing was now clear. He had made his choice, and the world could no longer ignore him. The welcome in Ouagadougou was thunderous. Crowds gathered at the airport, waving flags and chanting Traoré's name. For many, his appearance at Red Square was not a gamble, it was glory. A symbol that Africa, too, could walk among giants without bending its knee. But beneath the cheers came quiet rumblings. Western embassies issued veiled statements of concern. Aid packages were suddenly under review. International media painted Traoré as a radical strongman aligning with autocrats. Inside the palace, the mood was cautious. Still, Traoré remained composed. He knew the cost of leadership was discomfort. "If we are punished for choosing dignity," he told his cabinet, "then let our suffering become the price of our freedom." Weeks passed. Tensions grew. But so did something else: respect. Other African leaders began to reach out, curious, cautious, inspired. They saw in Traoré not just a rebel, but a blueprint. And so, as the dust settled, a truth emerged. Real independence isn't gifted. It's claimed. By standing in Red Square, Traoré hadn't just accepted an invitation, he had drawn a line in history. A quiet lesson echoed through the continent. True sovereignty is not declared, it is demonstrated. And the world was watching. Thank you for watching this journey with us. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and leave your thoughts in the comments below. Your support means the world to us, and together we can continue exploring more stories like this. Until next time, stay curious and keep the spirit of adventure alive.